Greetings all, Ferrari-Man601 here. Welcome back to another F-Rant video, this time about the 2019 Japanese Grand Prix, and specifically about Ferrari's Charles Leclerc and his actions during that race. Now, after the race, he was assessed a couple of penalties, of course, for the lap 1, turn 2 incident between he and Max Verstappen. Both cars made contact, both cars sustained some rather significant damage. Max Verstappen eventually had to retire from the race as knock-on effects from that collision. However, beyond that, Charles Leclerc was then handed a further penalty for, and in the words of the FIA, continuing to drive a car in a dangerous condition. Charles Leclerc sustained damage to his left-hand side pod, his left-hand mirror support. The mirror later came off, and most significantly, he sustained damage to the left-hand side of his front wing. Many pieces of it came off during the collision. Other pieces of it, particularly a rather large section of end fence, stayed on the car for another 2 laps. Eventually, it broke free on the back straight in front of Lewis Hamilton, who was following Leclerc very close behind. It showered Hamilton's car with carbon shards and other associated components of the front wing and its immediate surrounding areas, and a lot of people looked at that and said, hey, that was not cool, guys. How come he didn't come in? And, of course, all of those are very valid questions to be asking. However, what has come out since in the fallout of all of this, in addition to the FIA penalty, many people are now going out on the internet and talking about how irresponsible Charles Leclerc is and how it was even malicious of him to continue driving that car knowing full well that it was damaged. Well, why don't we take a look at the actual radio transmissions that were exchanged between Ferrari and Charles Leclerc between laps 1 and 3 and take a look at what actually transpired. People are going out there saying that Charles willfully ignored a team order to come into the pits and that he even ignored an FIA order to come into the pits. Neither one of these things is true, and the radio transcript absolutely proves this. At the start of the race, Charles and Max go into turn 1 and turn 2, basically side by side. Charles has the inside line, Verstappen is on the outside. Charles picks up a bit of understeer, a slight little twitch across the front end of the car. He has to apply a little bit of opposite lock to correct. Unfortunately, Max Verstappen is right there immediately on his left. When Charles makes that correction, the cars make contact. Verstappen is punted off the road into a half spin, and he falls to the back of the field. Charles is able to continue without losing position, but he does lose many important aero bits on his car, including some significant damage to the left-hand side of his front wing. A few moments later, as Charles is approaching the hairpin on lap 1, he transmits to the team, "I've got damage." The team then replies, "Copy, we are checking it." A little bit later on, at the end of the first lap, as Charles is exiting the chicane before going into the long right-hander full throttle corner to begin lap 2, the team transmits to Charles, "Box now, box." Charles then replies to this immediately. He says, "Why?" or potentially he says, "What?" The audio slightly garbled there. He says, "Why?" or "What?" It was too late. The team then replies, "Copy, understood." Ferrari sent that transmission to him as he was in the acceleration zone, leaving that final chicane. So in other words, if the driver is going to come into the pits, he needs to know beforehand. Otherwise, he cannot alter his line at this point to make it into the pit entrance. Plus, if he were to make that maneuver abruptly to cut back across the circuit into the pit entrance, they would probably give him a penalty for an unsafe pit entry anyway. So he decides, no, it's too late, and I don't think I could safely do this. So he says it was too late. The team says, "Copy, understood." Later on lap 2, in the approach to the first Degner corner, Charles then transmits to the team, "Why don't we continue a little bit more?" At this point, he is trying to assess what's going on with the car, and evidently he feels okay, so he asks the team, "Why don't we continue a little bit more?" A few moments later, on the approach to the hairpin on lap 2, the team then transmits to Charles, "We need to box this lap, box." Charles then responds, "Copy, box. Just to let you know, the car doesn't feel that bad. I know it probably looks bad, but the car is quite okay. Do you confirm that we need to box?" On the approach to 130R coming down the back straight, the team transmits to Charles, "We need to box now, box. Confirm." So that's a definite call into the pits by the team on the approach to 130R. Just as Charles exits 130R, though, he still has the order to come into the pits, and we assume that he's going to comply with that. However, on the exit of 130R, just a few seconds after the team called him into the box, the team then transmits, "Stay out, stay out." Charles goes through the final chicane. He passes the pit entrance. Just as he crosses timing and scoring to begin lap 3, the team then transmits once again, "Stay out." Later on, through the exit of the S's in Sector 1, the team then transmits an instruction to Charles, and suck 6 when you can, suck 6. That is a transmission regarding a steering wheel setting with regard to the state of charge on the MGUK system. That's a normal switch change that they will ask the drivers to do at several points during the race, and Charles then complies with this order. He does not get on the radio to acknowledge it. He simply makes a switch change, and the team obviously can see that with telemetry. Later on lap 3, as Charles is approaching 130R, the piece of the front wing, the end fence, then comes loose, and parts of that actually impact the car of Lewis Hamilton behind. At that moment, the team then transmits to Charles, and box now, box, we need to box this lap, box this lap. There's no radio reply from Charles. He takes to the pit lane at the end of lap 3. As he is in the pit lane, he says, and then he cuts himself off. He continues, "Yeah, it was quite okay." The team then replies to that, "We needed to," at this point it becomes slightly inaudible. It sounds like they may have said we needed to check it, but I'm not entirely sure. The audio physically cuts off there. "We needed to check it, so we will change the nose, and you can use K2 on, K2 on." The pit stop happens. Charles leaves the pits. They tell him track clear as he leaves the pit lane, and then the race continues. So that right there is literally the word-for-word transcript of the car-to-pit and pit-to-car radio transmissions between Ferrari and Charles Leclerc between laps 1 and 3. At no point in there is there an actual order to come into the pits that is refused or ignored by the driver. They called him in on lap 1. It was too late for Charles to make the pit lane. He asks if they can continue. Ferrari says, "No, we need to come in," and then they go back on that order and tell him to stay out well before the pit entrance on lap 2. Lap 3, the wing finally comes apart, and then they tell him to pit, and Charles does pit. So there is no place in that whole radio exchange where you can definitively say that Charles Leclerc disobeyed a team order. It simply does not exist. So anybody who is saying that Charles disobeyed a team order is 100% manufacturing that. That is a pure fabrication. At no point did Charles Leclerc disobey a team order to come into the pit lane. As any driver would, if the car is feeling okay, he's going to tell the team, "It feels okay. I don't know if we absolutely have to stop at this time." And the team evidently agreed with him, telling him to stay out at the end of lap 2. So Ferrari were reasonably satisfied with the figures they were seeing on telemetry, and Charles obviously was reasonably satisfied with what he was feeling in the car. The other point in this that I definitely need to demonstrate to you is the FIA then giving a penalty to Charles Leclerc for continuing to drive the car in a dangerous condition. Now, I know that none of us really will ever have the opportunity to sit in a Formula One car, but I think we get a reasonable idea of what it must look like from sim racing. And when you're in the cockpit of one of these cars, and I've even driven an open-wheel car in real life before, so I can tell you from first-hand experience about this, when you're in the cockpit of one of these cars, you cannot see your own front end. You really can't. You sit so low in these cars, and the cockpit sills come up so high that you basically can only see down the front of your own chassis and the tops of your front wheels, and that's about it. You have no visibility in terms of what's immediately in front of you, so certainly the driver is not able to see his own front wing. What Charles was able to see, and the onboard video confirms this, he was able to see that there was damage along the left side of the car, and the mirror support for the left-hand wing mirror was destroyed and knocked off the car with the collision with Verstappen. So Charles is actually reaching over with his right hand on the fast parts of the circuit, trying to hold his mirror in position, because he could obviously see that it's flexing about wildly. So Charles knows that there is damage on the car. However, he can only go off of what the team tells him and what he's feeling through the steering wheel in terms of trying to figure out any other damage to the front end. Obviously, the end fence on his front wing was hanging off, but he can't see that from the cockpit. There's no way that he can know definitively how much damage there is on the car. And at no point in that radio exchange do Ferrari tell him the extent of the damage on the car. The only thing that we have in terms of that specific reference to that specific area on the car is on lap 2 when he's approaching the hairpin. Charles says, "I know it probably looks bad, but the car is quite okay." So he doesn't know what his own front wing looks like, and the team never tell him that, hey, by the way, you've got something hanging off of the front wing. They don't say that at all. They're only listening to their driver and then calling him into the pits on lap 2 and then stubbing down that order to come into the pits on lap 2. So at no point does Charles Leclerc definitively know the state of his front wing, and Ferrari don't tell him even though they can see it. They have the discretion to call him into the pits. They do it on lap 2, they renege on that order on lap 2, and then the wing comes apart on lap 3, and Ferrari definitively call him into the pits. The FIA, on the other hand, at their discretion at any time during the event, whenever the cars are on track, they can call any car into the pit lane for effectively any reason. And the way in which the FIA do that is via a flag signal, the black and orange flag. It's the black flag with the orange circle in the middle. Sometimes it's called the meatball. When that flag is displayed, it's displayed from the main flag stand at start-finish alongside the car number in question. That is a definitive order from the FIA to come into the pits for repairs. At no point during the Japanese Grand Prix was the black and orange flag displayed for any car, never mind for car number 16, Charles Leclerc. So for the FIA to say that Charles Leclerc deserves and receives a penalty for driving a car in an unsafe condition is entirely baseless. The FIA have at their discretion at any time during the event the ability to call any car into the pit lane for repairs or otherwise, and they do that via the black and orange flag. The black and orange flag was never displayed for car number 16. So there you go. There is the definitive answer to all of this. The penalty that was received by Charles Leclerc is completely baseless. The FIA are effectively imposing a penalty for something that they would have done, but they did not do. Therefore, how can somebody reasonably receive a penalty for driving a dangerous car when the FIA did not take the necessary action at the time to alert the driver to the fact that your car is in an unsafe condition and you need to take to the pit lane as soon as possible? They did not do it. They cannot, in my opinion, impose an ex post facto penalty like this because there was no facto, there was no action, there was no hard fact in there saying we're displaying this flag, it means you need to come into the pits right now. It never happened. Hopefully that dispels all of the fake news and bad information and emotionally charged nonsense that's out there right now. Charles Leclerc did not disobey a team order to pit, nor did he disobey an FIA order to pit because the FIA never gave an order to pit. Until next time, thank you all very much for listening. Ferrari Man 601 saying thanks, and of course, we will see you soon.